Go ahead and try this number 15 before you watch the video. This is a problem where the terminology in the text is very difficult. It's overwhelming, actually. When that happens, that usually means the underlying logic will be relatively straightforward. Because if you had a problem like this with this horrible jargon plus very challenging reasoning, the problem would probably just be way too hard. Who knows? Maybe the hardest of the hard questions could be that way, but I think there's an inverse correlation, or a negative correlation, as we'll talk about in a minute, between the apparent superficial difficulty of a question and its actual difficulty. Not saying this is easy, but once you get through the jargon and you understand what the relationships are between these terms, it's a lot easier than it first appears. We're trying to support their claim, so here's their claim. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's first read the text, see what's going on, and then we'll break it down. We'll see what choice fits. So it says the linguistic niche hypothesis, LNH, posits that the exotericity of a language, which they define as how prevalent non-native speakers are, and grammatical complexity are inversely related, which the LNH ascribes to attrition of complex grammatical rules as more non-native speakers adopt the language but fail to acquire those rules. So to translate this, they're saying that the exotericity is basically how many non-native speakers there are of a language. And they say that that's inversely related to grammatical complexity. Inversely means as one goes up, the other goes down. And sometimes what I like to do, if I can, is try to maybe understand where that's coming from, just to help me build a good model of this in my head. This makes sense to me because if a language is more grammatically complex, it does make sense that you would have fewer non-native speakers because it's just harder to learn, right? If the language is harder to learn because it's more grammatically complex, you're going to have fewer people that are going to learn it. And that's what kind of the next bit says, where it says the LNH ascribes to attrition of complex grammatical rules as more non-native speakers adopt the language but fail to acquire those rules. It's like people try to learn it, but they eventually kind of give up or they hit a wall because it gets too complicated. So far, I feel like even despite the complexity of the language, I have a basic sense of what's going on. That's all we really need. We don't need to be linguistics experts here. Focusing on two characteristics that are positive indices of grammatical complexity: fusion, when new phonemes arise from the merger of previously distinct ones, and informativity, language's capacity for meaningful variation. They conducted a quantitative analysis for more than 1,300 languages and claim, here we go, the outcome is inconsistent with the LNH. So the study they did is inconsistent with the LNH. So our choice should be evidence that the LNH is not true. So again, to break down the LNH, as complexity increases, exotericity decreases, right? That's our inverse relationship. And they said positive indices of complexity are fusion and informativity. Whatever those are, this is where I don't really care much about the actual definitions of these things anymore, because I'm just looking for the relationships between these ideas, right? As complexity increases, and complexity is measured by fusion and informativity, so you could say as fusion increases, as informativity increases, the LNH posits that exotericity decreases, right? The more complex the language, the fewer non-native speakers learn it. We need to show the opposite in our answer. We need to show a direct relationship, probably, right? As these go up, exotericity goes up, or vice versa. So let's analyze the choices. A, their analysis showed a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion and between grammatical complexity and informativity. So this is just on this side of the ledger, and it actually kind of contradicts what the passage talks about. This contradicts the positive indices bit, because they said like a positive indice of grammatical complexity are these two things. But then A is saying, no, they're not actual positive indices. They're negative correlates of these two things. It's the opposite of what the text is talking about. But either way, it says nothing about exotericity, which is ultimately what we care about. Like we're caring about an evaluation of the LNH, which is this relationship between exotericity and grammatical complexity. A just doesn't consider that at all. And remember, when we're analyzing questions to see what supports a claim, laser focus on the claim. Like the claim is talking about the LNH and if it's consistent or not with the study. I need to make sure my choice is completely aligned with that, and A is missing that. Holding aside the fact that it like contradicts kind of assumption of the text, which is a little weird. It's just not relevant to the claim, which is its major failing. Let's look at B. The analysis showed a slightly negative correlation between grammatical complexity and exotericity. So actually, this is what we would have expected, right? This supports the LNH. Supports the LNH. The LNH is that there is a negative correlation. There's an inverse relationship between grammatical complexity and exotericity. This is what the claim is. So that's not what we want. We want to, or this is what the LNH is. Our claim is to weaken the LNH. So that's the opposite of what we want. So this is opposite. The analysis showed a slightly positive correlation between grammatical complexity and fusion. Again, this is kind of part of the assumption. This is just stated already. We know this is a positive indice. So unlike A, this does support this kind of opening claim, but it's not relevant to our claim that we care about here. It says nothing about exotericity. Hopefully D is the answer. They showed a slightly positive correlation between fusion and exotericity and between informativity and exotericity. Here we go, finally, right? This is the opposite of what the LNH says, right? If it is the case that there's a positive correlation between fusion and exotericity, what they're saying is as fusion increases, exotericity increases, but that is not what the LNH posits, right? It posits the other way around. And same thing with informativity and exotericity. So choice D is the only one that basically flips those correlations around in the way that we wanted to undermine the LNH to support this claim. And so that's why 15 is D. So notice here with the complex terminology, it turns out you could have just used letters. You could have said, as A goes up, B goes down. And as C goes up, A goes up. And as D goes up, A goes up. And so therefore, as C and A go up, B goes down. The actual words, complexity, exotericity, fusion, informativity, they don't matter. Like the underlying content doesn't really matter. You don't need to understand linguistics. You just need to understand the relationships between these factors and how, as one changes, others change or not. That's the key with questions like these. So whenever you see complicated science, take a deep breath. Just be like, okay, let me find the relationships between these ideas. Let me extract those relationships and then answer the question, whatever you're trying to do, based on those relationships as presented in the text. So in this case, we get choice D.